start us off here?
After this, opened Job his mouth, cursed this day. Job spake and said, let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night which I was said, that man shall conceive. Let the day be dark. Let not God regard it from above, yet let light shine upon it. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it. Let cloud dwell upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. Whereas that night, let darkness seize upon it. Let it not be joined into the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Lo, let that night be solitary. Let no joyful voice be heard therein. Let them curse it, that curse the day. Who are ready, raise up in their morning. Let the stars of the twilight therefore be dark, and look for light. But have none, neither let it see the dawning of the day. Because it shut not up the doors of my mother's womb, nor hid sorrow from mine eyes. Why died I not from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when I came forth out of the belly? Why did the knees prevent me from the prince which I should suffer? And now, for now, should I have lain still and been quiet, and should have slept, then had I been at rest. With kings and counselors of the earth, which built desolate places for themselves, are the princes that had gold, who filled their houses with silver. For as a hidden and uncommon birth, I have not been as infants which never saw the light. That the wicked ceased from troubling, and they were weary that are at rest. Be at rest. There the prisoners rest together, and hear not the voice of the oppressor. The small and the great are there, and the servant is free from the master. Wherefore, the life given to them that is in mystery, the life unto the bitter insult, which long for death, but cometh not, and dig for it more than the hidden treasures, which rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they can find the grave. Why is the life given to a man whose way is hid, and whom God hath hedged in? For my sighing cometh before I eat, and my worries are poured out like the waters. And the thing which I greatly feared is come upon me, and that which I was afraid of is come to me. I was not in safety, neither had I rest, neither was I quiet, yet trouble came.
So there's really two parts to this, what Job talks about here. He first talks about he wished he never was born, and then, after he gets done with that subject, then he talks about, why can't I just die? So we're going to try to see what God has to say about this, but I think down through verse 16 is him talking about what he thinks he knows about, or what he perceives is truth about not being born. So it feels like he thinks he knows all of this about, if I hadn't been born, then this, the bad things wouldn't have happened to me and everything would be fine, because those who are not born are not, don't have anything to fear from all this evil that's come upon me. So I think it's kind of like what we do. I talked a little bit about my friend who killed himself about 25 years ago. And I remember having a conversation with another friend of ours, and they were talking about, for some reason he brought it up to my friend. We weren't really close at the time. We were not super close. We talked all the time, but only because I would call him. But he had talked to this other friend who was probably closer to him at the time, and he said, when I die, nobody's going to miss me. I think we could all, or at least some of us, could relate to that at times. That thought at least that nobody's going to miss the person. But he said it to somebody who was going to miss him, which was an odd thing to do, because it just shows you're thinking about yourself more than you are about others. And I think the reason he said that I would be the only one that missed him is because he knew I was going to call him every month, no matter what. Whether we were, had something to talk about. It didn't matter. When we talked, it was just like we had never stopped the conversation. We just talked about whatever. So he could see that I might miss that, but he couldn't see past himself any further. He couldn't see what his mother or his father were going to go through for their lives, which I've seen. He couldn't see what his brother would go through. He couldn't see what his friend who he told this to was going to go through. And most of all, the guy that we hung out with back when we were teenagers, that guy had so much trouble with his dad. And I think it was kind of the same thing that I felt like, why did I waste all my time being with this person who's just going to take away my entire childhood? It felt like he took away my entire childhood because nobody else knew what we did together. So it's like I talked about, it's like when you're getting older and people around you are passing away, you don't have that memory that you can go to and say, hey, remember this, because it's gone now. Because nobody else remembers, I have to tell them what we did together. So I think we can relate to this. And Job was doing this in a similar kind of way here, like, what would have happened if I had never been born? It would have been great. Everything would have been fine. But he doesn't know first of all, he doesn't know God's plan. So he doesn't even know why God would allow us to be born and for evil to exist. So we've talked a little bit about this. But on top of that, he doesn't know how it would have affected not only, everyone around him. Some people would have never been born. Some people would have not been the people that they were because of him. But even those that it affected God in a way that he was taken back by it, I think. In some way, God was like, wait just a minute, you don't understand what you're talking about. And then in verse 17 and 18, 19, it reads, this is what Job says, there the wicked cease from troubling, and there the weary be at rest. There the prisoners rest together, they hear not the voice of the oppressor. The small and great are there, and the servant is free from his master. What do you think about that? I mean, we know a lot more than Job, but what do you think about what Job says there? It says the wicked cease from their troubling when they die. What do you think? Is that true? Yeah.
Not really. Not very true.
Yeah. So Job is showing here, partially because God didn't, he doesn't have this entire word in front of him like we do. But partially because he just doesn't know God's plan. He doesn't know, it sounds like he doesn't know of hell. He doesn't know exactly what happens after you die. And we're going to see that here soon. God's going to talk about that a little. And then he says, the small and great are there, and the servant is free from his master. So that's the same thing. Is the servant free from his master? Are we free from God if we serve God? Are we free from Satan if we serve Satan? So we're not free. So he doesn't fully understand. His logic is, all I know is that I don't know. It looks like there's nothing after you die, because you just take a body and you bury it and then you're done. So he's just telling you what he can see, and it's a lot of what Job does, and it's a lot of what his friends do throughout, talking about what they know. His friends are not dumb about who God is. We'll read a little bit about Eliphaz. And Eliphaz is the only person out of the whole scripture, all the scriptures in Job, except for God, who is quoted in the New Testament. So Eliphaz knows God. He knows who he is. But knowing who God is not necessarily the same thing as knowing why God does what he does, or knowing who God is, and God will explain that a little bit more here in chapter 38. So then Job continues on and he asks why he's alive, why does he have to suffer? Why do people have to suffer? He kind of goes beyond himself and says, why does man have to suffer? And he says, and then in verse 23 he says, why is light given to a man whose way is hid, and whom God hath hedged in? So there's two parts to this, because Satan said that Job was hedged in by God. So, but this is not what Job's saying here. So Job was protected by God. And now he's saying he's hedged in with evil. He's flipping what was being said. So why would somebody live? It's the same thing we talked about earlier. Why does God allow sin? Why does God allow life then? Why does God allow anything if he's not going to do what we want him to do? If he's not going to protect us, and I think in this case, Job's saying, if he's not going to protect me when I do the right things, when I serve, and we know that he did serve because God said he served. It wasn't like he's making a claim that can't be backed up. God backed it up. So God said he feared God. He hated evil. He loved good, So he's not making a claim here that's not true. God said he's a perfect man, an upright man, one that feared God and eschewed evil. Somebody who hated evil enough to speak up about it. Somebody who made sure that other people, learned to hate evil. He already addressed his wife and told her, be careful about what you say about what life is and what we should do in life. Should I really curse God and die? Do you know what you're talking about? Be careful not to speak as someone who doesn't have knowledge. And I think in that respect, she had knowledge. She understood, but she was frustrated and she decided to say, this is what you should do because this is what I can see. This is again another example. I can see this. This is the only thing that this could be, is that you've done evil. That's the only way this could have happened. So, in these last few verses 20 through 26, what do you see here that is either good or bad about Job's lament about still being alive? Or what do you see at all in all of this chapter about who Job is and what he understands or what he knows or what he thinks he knows? We've already talked about some of it. So one thing we see is Job does not truly understand God's purpose for life. And God's going to address that. And then Job does not seem to understand the nature of the afterlife. But Job does understand, we know from the first two chapters, Job does understand who God is. And he understands that just because everything's going great right now doesn't mean that it's going to go great forever. So he continued to recognize the good God had given, or the good that he had received, and the fact that, he might not receive that all the time. Anything else that you can see that Job knows or doesn't know?
I did see the verse back in the first chapters. They're talking about how that he was continually doing sacrifices for his children.
Right.
And yet the children were taken away. In this verse, it's, like it says, he knows there's a God. But, he's to the point now where, I wish I had never done this. I wish I was dead. I wish I was gone.
Yeah.
I can't imagine, much less being that much pain and suffering, right, physically, and then knowing wishing I was dead. Here's people we know that have said that, they've been in so much pain. They feel like their veins are on fire. And, few people taking their lives. Yeah. We hope we can withstand. We hope we can hold on.
Yeah.
That's one of the things looking at there is we may think that we got the faith, but we may have enough people.
Yeah, I think Job feels like he's in a problem that he shouldn't be in, first of all, and that if he's going to have to be in the problem, why not just not be here, either by not being born or by dying, going ahead and dying. But he hasn't taken his own life. He hasn't decided that this is the path he needs to follow. So I think something good that we can see, Job hasn't lost everything. And this is kind of for us too. I think, one of the problems with my friend who killed himself is he was struggling with, why was he here? Why was he alive? And he was also struggling with, who was God? Why would God allow all this stuff? So although Job's struggling with all this, and we have to remember this is months. He says in, I think, chapter 6, that he's been like this for months. So this isn't just a short period of time. I know we feel like it is sometimes because chapters 1 and 2 are kind of a summary of what happened before friends start talking. And it feels like, he's only had this problem for 2 days. But this is a long period of time. We don't know how long it was between the first incident and the second incident, and we don't know how long it's been since he's been in pain, but we do know he says it's been months. So it's not just here and gone, and then God fixes everything in the last chapter, and everything's good to go. And obviously, just because God fixes everything in the last chapter, and it feels like to us it's good to go, it's still not good to go for Job. He still lost his children. He still suffered for a long period of time. So the other thing I think we have to recognize here is that Satan, again, like we talked about, he thought he knew. He probably thinks he knows everybody, but he thought he knew Job. Just let me first attack everything he has, and then let me attack him. And then if I do that, he's going to change. And just think of Satan listening to Job right now. He's got to be saying, oh, here he goes. He's about ready to do it. Because he still doesn't know Job's heart. So he still doesn't know what's going to happen. So, if we were in this situation listening to Job, it's the same thing for Satan. Satan has no idea that that Job can withstand this. He thinks, oh, well, obviously most people wouldn't withstand this, so he's not going to be able to. There's no way he can do it. So we have to remember this is a lesson for Satan as much as it is for Job. Not just a lesson, but the fact that things can happen to us even if we're serving the way we should be serving. Things will happen to us even if we're serving the way we should be serving. That God will allow us to be tested. So let's start taking a look at God's answer now. So we're going to go to chapter 38. And God doesn't answer directly. He's not targeting Job's lament here, but he's going to provide questions that give answers. And he's going to do it in a way that I'm going to try to help you think of it in a different way than we probably do. Because sometimes it sounds like God's being sarcastic, or like he's like, well, you think you know everything, and or it feels like what my dad used to say when I get in trouble. I'd say, why should I do that, or why do I need to do that? And he would just say, because I said so. That's all you need to know. At that point, the belt comes out next, so it doesn't really matter what the reason is. The belt's good enough. So I'd like for you to think about this in a different way, though. That God's already talked about his love for Job. This isn't like God, saying, it's not him saying, hey, I'm going to rattle off some things that you probably don't know. If you can tell me, then I'll listen to you. It's more of a way of God leading Job down a path toward his own understanding of the truth of what's going on and why it's going on. Now, it's not directly answering why it's going on. It's just saying, hey, think about this. Think about this. It's kind of the same thing Job did to his wife. Job said, be careful about what you're saying. Don't act like one of these other people who doesn't know. You have knowledge. You know. Don't pretend like you don't know just because you're upset. And God's saying the same thing. He's saying, Job, be careful what you're saying right here. Do you really know? Now, I'm not saying that God isn't frustrated, or it's clear that he is. He comes in a whirlwind. So in verse 1, 2, and 3, I'm going to read this real quick. It says, this is chapter 38. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me. So he came in a whirlwind. I would think a whirlwind's pretty loud, so God's going to have to be pretty loud. Or he's going to have to be inside his head so he can hear without, hearing the whirlwind. But this is done in love. And the love that we think of may not be the love that God chose. It's actually part of what I think we try to understand about God but don't understand. Like, what is God's love? God's love is action. In this case, maybe justice toward, questioning. But that love, it has something to do with what we think of as love a lot of times, like, wanting to hold someone or care about them in a certain way. But we have to be careful about God's love. God's love is different. God's love is action. God's love is understanding past what we understand. It's further. It's something, it's part of what he's about to say to Job, that Job, you don't understand why I did what I did. You don't understand why these things are happening to you. And you don't even understand what you're talking about when you say you shouldn't have been born and you should just die. So I think we have to be clear here that this isn't just God letting Job have it. At least that's what I believe. I believe this is God's way of kind of mildly saying what needs to be said without destroying Job, without coming at him angrily. So, what do you think Job doesn't understand? And what does God say about Job understanding? So let's read first few verses here to answer that question. So in verse 4 it starts, "Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? And who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut up the seas with the doors, when it brake forth, as if it had issued out of the womb? When I made the cloud the garment thereof, and thick darkness the swaddling band for it, and brake up for it my decreed place, and set bars and doors, and said, Hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and hither and here shalt thou proud waves be stayed. Hast thou commanded the morning since the days, and caused the day spring to know his place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, and the wicked might be shaken out of it. It is turned as clay to the seal, and they stand as a garment, and from the wicked their light is withdrawn, and the high arm shall be broken. Hast thou entered into the springs of sea, and hast thou walked in search of the depths? So just think about what God said here. Where did God start with Job? Yeah, he started where the beginning, as far as Job knows. He didn't start a million years prior to Job. He didn't start it a billion years prior to Job. Explain to him what's been happening, what God's done. He didn't explain to him the creation of the angels, the sons of God here. He didn't explain, what's before that Job doesn't understand. He explained things, or he didn't even explain them. He asked questions about things that Job knew existed. So he had to start at the beginning. He had to start where Job understood it. So what should we remember about God as he starts what he seems like in the interrogation of Job? And I think this is what I've already talked about, that God loved Job, and that he's walking him through not only what Job is questioning or thinking about, but he's walking Job through the creation and up through further the things that he wants to talk about after creation. But he's throwing things in here. So here in verse, he starts in verse 13. He says that it might take hold of the ends of the earth, and the wicked might be shaken out of it. So first of all, he's addressing something that Job said here. Job said the wicked, basically when they die, their suffering is gone. Because it seems like Job feels like if you're wicked on earth And I think he has some good evidence to back this up. He thinks. We know from his friends that he has taught those who have been in sin or wicked or evil. They share with him, hey, we're just teaching you what you've taught others, and what you've taught others has improved their lives. So he's taking something that Job thinks he knows, and he's saying, hey, the wicked are going to be shaken out of this. They're going to be, their light is withheld. You already know this, but what you think you know is that their light is withheld on earth. He's not speaking to heaven specifically, but you don't know, is what he's saying is you don't know what happens after what you do know. So you've got to be careful about the path you're treading here, is what I feel like God's saying. You are talking about things you don't understand. You are trying to make points based on your misunderstanding of what's true. So again, he's starting at the beginning for Job, and he's going to lead him down a path of, did you know all these things from the beginning? Were you there with the angels? Were you there when I started creation? Do you even know why I made the earth the size it was? Do you know why I decided to set this part of it as a cornerstone? Do you know why I held the waters back? Do you know, it's a cautionary kind of, I think it's a cautionary wording of God. Not saying, Job, you just don't get it, and I don't care if you get it. You just need to do what I say. But it's him guiding Job through down a path that he wants him to follow in his mind. And then he further talks about, in verse 17, he says, have the gates of death been opened unto thee, and hast thou seen the doors of the shadows of death? This is another caution of Job. He now steps back. He says, not only do you not understand what happens with the wicked, you understand what happens on earth, but you don't understand what happens after. But you don't have you been to death? Have you seen what happens after death? You know what's going on. You're talking about it like you do. You're acting like you do. You need to know that what you're talking about is the truth. And I think God obviously knows what Job knows and doesn't know, and what he understands and what he doesn't understand. So it's clear for God that what direction he needs to go in this conversation, obviously. So does somebody want to read the rest of the chapter? It's pretty long reading, but it's verse 18 through 41.
As thou perceives the breadth of the earth, declare it thou knowest it all. Where is the way where light dwelleth, and paths of darkness, where is the place thereof? That thou shouldest take into the mouth thereof, and that thou shouldest know the paths to the house thereof. Knowest thou it, because thou wast then born, because the number of thy days is great? Hast thou entered into the treasures of the snow, or hast thou seen the treasures of the hill, which I have reserved against the time of trouble, against the day of battle and war? By what way is the light parted, which scattereth the east wind upon the earth? Who hath divided a water course from the overflowing of waters, or away from the light of the thunder? To cause it to rain on the earth, where no man is, on the wilderness wherein there is no man, to satisfy the desolate and waste ground, and to cause the blood of the tender earth to spring forth. Hath the rain a father, or who hath begotten drops of dew, out of whose womb came the ice, waters are hid, and swift the sun, and the face of the deep is frozen. Canst thou bind the sleep influences of Palladius, or loose the bands of Orion? Canst thou bring forth Nazareth in his season, or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons? Knowest thou the ordinances of earth? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth? Canst thou lift up thy voice to the clouds, and abundance of waters may come to thee? Canst thou send lightnings that they may go and say to thee, Here we are? Who hath put wisdom in the inward parts, or who hath given understanding to the heart? Who can number the clouds in wisdom, or who can say the bottoms of heaven? When the dust groweth into hardness, and the clouds flee fast together, wilt thou hunt the prey through the line, or fill the appetite of the young lions? When they couch in their dens, and abide in the covert to lie in wait, who provided for the raven his food, when his young ones cry to God, they wander for lack of meat.
Wow, that's a lot. I mean, just in that short time. What do you think God's doing here as he walks through all of these things? I mean, you guys can tell me something maybe I don't know. I've learned the most when you guys tell me something. But what is it? What kind of path is God following here? What is he really saying?
It's a humbling element. He's reminding him of God.
Right? Yeah, definitely. Anything else? Anybody sees there? I think he continues down the same path he started with, which is, look, you know about these things. But it's kind of like what we say, if a tree's in the falls in the forest, is there a sound? He makes it rain where there's nobody. Why does he do that? Because there's something there. He wants it to rain there. Like, have you even thought about this stuff? I thought about it. Do you even think about what happens where you are not? Or, he's sharing all these things like Job knows the lion has to eat. He knows the raven has to eat. He knows the waters do something over there, and the waters do something else over there. And he knows, all of these things, but he doesn't know what's really happening, what's behind it all, what's making it happen. Why would it happen the way it happens? I mean, just explain to me why. If you feel like you understand why you should be alive, if you feel like you should only be alive when everything's at its best, then why did I create you? Why would I allow evil to happen to you, even when you're doing what's right? Why would I go through this or go down this path? What do you understand about me that why I did all this that would say to you, you should not have been born? I created you. That's the reason you were born. And there's not God. At some point, God is like, this is all that you are able to know. This is what I want you to know. But don't try to take on God's place in understanding why you are here or what the earth is about. He's going from the most basic to the more difficult. So we don't even understand the most basic things. We don't understand, how do people and animals get hungry? And when they do, why are they where they are? I mean, he's going to soon say, talk about some other things about why animals do what they do and who animals are. We lived out in the desert for a while, and we were driving down the interstate. No cities anywhere around. All of a sudden, there's donkeys. I'm like, what in the world are donkeys doing out in the middle of the desert? And he talks about it right here. He says, why did I put the donkeys out there? They don't even care about the rest of the world. They'll just be out in the desert looking for any blade of grass they can find. The smallest little thing. You know, there's got to be a little water, but other than that, they're happy to be out in the middle of nowhere. You know, I'm like, it doesn't even make sense. You think about the sheep or the bighorn sheep climbing the mountains, being way up, trying to find a little blade of grass. All this grass is right here. You know, you think, what are you doing? You know, we can't even understand why they would go so far up maybe you need to go up for protection. Just go up like 30 feet. That's good enough. Nothing's going to get you there. You know, but why do you have to stand where if the tiniest little thing happens, you're going to fall off the cliff and die? It's because God made it that way. And he's trying to point out that just the way that Job told his wife, don't be, you know, kind of going down a path that you don't know, or you believe you understand what's going on. God's telling Job the same thing. So as we go through this, I'm going to end here, but as we go through this, I think we're going to see more of this, more of God explaining and more of Job commiserating or trying to understand why he is and where he is in the big scheme of things. So I hope we gain something out of this, and I hope we see God in a little bit different light. I mean, there is some truth to God as saying, don't question me, but it's not the same kind of, I don't think it's the same kind of thing that I've heard in the past, which is, don't question me because I'm right. You know, whatever I do is right. Don't worry about it. It's more of, you don't understand it. You're not going to understand it. Please just, you know what you know, and your job is to serve me. And I provide for you if you serve me. Now, I don't provide exactly what you want, and I don't always make it easy, but I think we're going to see that this path continues, especially for God in his description, and then we're going to talk a little bit about Eliphaz next week, just because he is quoted in the New Testament, and we're going to see why he's quoted in the New Testament, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about what Job says, and then how God is responding. So, appreciate your attention.